Being lean means reducing wastage as much as possible. Now, this book tells you how to do that in your startup, meaning how to go from zero to a lean business product that will make you millions by reducing needed time and money. So, the lean startup had three main parts in the book. The first one was the vision, where the author talks about building startups and about what it really means. He goes on to explain that startups really are just entrepreneurs being managers rather than those being technical and building products, not just innovators. Results have a very different meaning in startups than it does in a real company like Google or Microsoft. If you were to feed your employer with startup jargon, that's a surefire way of being terminated. The reason for that is because your results are not really targeted. Metrics such as high user retention, growth targets, and customer acquiring is super hard as a startup because you're initially starting out with something that you don't really know is scalable in the first place. But learning is your real metric in that sense. However, learning how to navigate customers, identifying key features that actually resonate to paying customers are what really leads to a better goal. But imagine telling your manager, oh, we did not really have sales in the last year, but we sure did learn a lot of things, right? Yeah, fired. The book goes on to say a lot more about defining entrepreneurs, startups, and what they are. Navigating extreme uncertainty is what entrepreneurs do, and startups are supposed to be a certain type of entity that promotes products or services. So the author, Eric Ries, was actually one of the founders of Invu, the app which released quite a while ago, and he claimed that it had a lot of learning curves to it. In fact, a lot of the things that they implemented in their application was not really what customers actually wanted. However, he emphasized the need of learning, which is something very unavoidable, but unfortunately not very measurable. The book also talks a lot about using validated learning, something that you measure your customers with based on your early adopters and what they would like to see in the application. Imagine trying to build something that no one really uses. That's a failing business model. And unfortunately, that is what most startups go into, thinking about vanity metrics such as number of users acquired, paying customers, retention. However, for a startup, those don't really matter. What you need to understand is what the author coined actionable metrics. These metrics are supposed to be what keeps your user engaged with your product and why they would want to do it. Using this idea makes you want to build upon your product and the key features that interests them and hooks them in, allowing you to reach out and branch into further customers that actually would love to see a feature like that. In between, the author also talks about experimenting and thinking big but starting small. However, the need for a startup to move quickly is very important. Essentially, you need to break down what you're trying to build and feed it to your customers to validate, to see if it's something that could work. The second part of the book was about steering. In this section, the author emphasizes the importance of building, measuring, learning, and feedback. This essentially is a loop that you're feeding your hypothesis with and trying to validate across. You need to build your strategies along the assumptions of this circle. Another key important part of the book is about analysis paralysis. Quite a lot of entrepreneurs go into this analysis phase where they start to think about what would really work out. And that means trying to plan out in the long run what actually works. However, they forget to do one key thing, trying to actually implement and experiment. This logic is very flawed in the first place because essentially you don't even know if your product has a place in the market just yet. That's why you need to test your customers and design it accordingly. First products are never perfect, and this is why MVPs are important. Eric has also talked about the different kind of MVPs that exist: video MVP, concierge MVP, and the role of design and quality in MVPs as well. For context, MVP stands for minimum viable product. What this means is it effectively does what you're supposed to do in your product. What this means is that this is the most effective part about your product. However, how you deliver your MVP to your customers can be very different. A video MVP can be something like you demonstrating the product to your potential customers. A specific type of concierge MVP is like you catering your MVP to specific customers entirely just so that you can get data and feedback on how to improve it. However, this is not really a scalable size product because you wouldn't be able to give the VIP treatment to almost every one of your customers were you to scale it up. You have to have some accountability framework that uses actionable metrics. And this is where pivoting or persevering comes in. When your product doesn't really achieve product market fit, you start to question what your product really is capable of. Is it really in the place that you would need it to be? or does it really fit into the market that you think people would like it to be? Pivoting is a special concept that makes you revamp your entire idea to something that would actually be profitable. Persevering is just pushing through a dark and difficult phase in which your product doesn't actually work and you just hope that you do. Quite a lot of type of pivoting exists, and based on your startup, you should really look at what would be important for you. The third part of the book was all about accelerate. Imagine batches of products that you build. If you were to have a certain type of car that you would mass produce and then later on realize there's some quality assurance check that fails, that fault would literally be in every single product that you delivered out there. That would lead to losses and breaks in customer trust. The author talks about using small batches and the idea of production's lean strategies in MVP building. It's not about shipping as much features as possible. It's about learning how to build a sustainable business over time that is profitable. Another really important concept in this part of the book was about the 5 ways. When you have an issue in your product, you don't necessarily try to point out what is the first issue that needs to be solved. Imagine having a technical issue from your end, from the business side of things. You would say, oh, the server is down, but you need to question further about why is it actually down. And that would actually allow you to go to the root of the problem that might not repeat later on in the future, were you to address it at the moment. That could go like, the server is down. Why is the server actually down? Someone pushed the wrong code into your product. Why was the person pushing the wrong code into the product? Could be that the person is not entirely experienced. If the person is not experienced, who was supposed to be guiding the person to deliver the product? The manager should have been training this specific employee to deliver the product. As you can see, this line of questioning allows you to focus on the root cause of the problem, not exactly trying to fix the surface issue. So all in all, a business is a human project that needs to be sustainable and profitable in the long run. Startups need to avoid wastage, and that could be in terms of time, money, and any other resources, especially when it comes to talent. What you're building is supposed to be a long-term project, not something that's a short-term selling plan. Check out my other videos in my channel. I'm trying to build an audience for entrepreneurial, and I believe that if you've come this far, you'd love to check out my other videos.